Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
A bit about my background and why the outdoors matters to me and why I'm passionate about children and their right to be in the outdoors and to claim it and own it as theirs. I grew up in a mining village in South Yorkshire and we were right on the edge of the village. So my natural playground was fields with pathways across them and woodlands with very deep valleys in the middle of them over which we strung swings and all the rest of it. I am 57 years old and still really like getting dirty in the garden. If you take me up a mountain, I am the one who will come back with the waterproof trousers covered in mud. It was not something that I experienced at school, the outdoors particularly. We did virtually no nature walks in my primary school, and in my secondary experience, apart from the Malham Tarn 8 days, there was virtually nothing. But what I did learn as a child was the value of just plain, wide, wild, open space with no programme, no agenda, nobody saying, do you know that's a such and such a fungus? It didn't actually matter because you were just out to play. And we did, wall to wall, for the whole of the 6-week holiday, come rain, come shine, just roamed about, basically. Climbed trees, lit fires, built dens, did all sorts. That's what gave me my love, really, of the outdoors. And I was very lucky as a sixth former then to come across the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers, as it then was, and spent my late teens and right the way through my 20s learning I can dry stone wall, I can culvert, I know how to coppice a woodland, I know how to plant a woodland that will be sustainable and multi-species, I know how to hang a gate, I know how to put up a mile of barbed wire fencing. And I taught children in the schools that I taught in, we set up nascent corps, BTCV corps, that went out and did stream clearing, pond clearing, tree planting on estates where the trees had always been pulled up, but when the kids planted them, they didn't get pulled up because they were their trees. And I went on from there into teaching and into a school, thank goodness, which took children on field studies for all of their CSE, GCSE, and whatever else exams they were doing, because we did coursework, and guess what? It was really successful. And when we did coursework, we did it in history, geography, geology, drama, art, sculpture, you name it. Those kids went away for residential experiences into places like the Black Country, to the Bliss Hill Museum, to Snowdonia, to the Lake District. It was an expected part of the culture of the school. It was an expected part of your professional duties, whatever you taught, and it made us a community. All of those backgrounds have made me a lifelong member of the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, the RSPB, the National Trust, English Heritage. They've made me a coastal walker, an estuary addict, somebody who will still stand absolutely stock still and gobsmacked at a flight of egret over the Essex coast, because that's just who I am. And it's who I am because of where I came from. And unless you make came from what children experience, you will end up with the 3 Ps, pointless, punishing, and piffling. The banning of play is what you'll get. Children will not be allowed to make a noise outside because if the old lady thinks they're causing a nuisance and they're over 10, they could be arrested. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Children do play out and they do make a noise. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child defends their right to art, to rest, to leisure, to relaxation, to play and to culture, and at our peril do we let it go. And I will finish with 5 Cs. What we're talking about is not just what the Field Studies Council does, but what the broad society offers its children in its countryside, which is their countryside, its culture, which is their culture, their creativity that will lead to them leading their communities. But the most important C that you deny if you lock your children away and you don't expect them to adventure and to get dirty and to play and to make a noise and to get lost and have to be found again is childhood.
I was prompted by my brief, which told me that I should anticipate the future over the next 70 years. Now, that's quite a big ask, really, but of course that's because we're celebrating the first 70 years of the Field Studies Council, and we should just quickly celebrate that because it is wonderful. The next 70 years, that's quite tricky. And to be absolutely honest, I can't really do 2083. I can do 2050. So I'm going to talk about three big things that happen between now and 2050. I don't know exactly when, but they're big, and they're really rather important for the Field Studies Council and for everybody who cares about opportunities for young people to engage with the natural world. First big thing, reason finally prevails on the phenomenon of accelerating climate change. As a consequence of that, radical decarbonisation becomes the biggest single imperative that brings humankind together. And precisely because we've left it so late, we find ourselves in the paradoxical but joyful position that humankind actually cooperates more at this point in its history than at any other time. Secondly, we eventually accept that conventional, exponential economic growth indefinitely into the future is indeed the idiocy that it's always been on a finite planet. We know that that system has to change, and we make those changes. Thirdly, the rolling IT revolution in which we currently find ourselves continues to roll. And once our excitement in the, quotes, Internet of Things has abated, it gives way to the Internet of Life on Earth, which is a very different story, connecting us dramatically and inspiringly to the whole web of life. Three big things, enormous things. And without the false idol of permanent exponential economic growth, we do begin to do things very, very differently, not least to redistribute work, because there isn't enough work in a slow-growing and no-growing economy to go round. Almost all of us work less and volunteer more. The vast majority of us, of course, still live in cities, but these cities are greener and much, much cleaner. By 2050, 40% of the food that we eat is grown in or immediately around the cities in which we live. Every school has its own grounds on which it can grow the food that the children can then learn to plant, nurture, harvest, prepare, cook, and eat. And this is considered to be an absolutely standard in any educational curriculum. So partly as a consequence of all of that, play on words here, National Health Service, Natural Health Service, that jokey little aside emerges as a dominant theme in the health system from the 2020s onwards. The evidence about the benign impact of contact with the natural world from a health perspective, both physiological and psychological, an evidence base which, by the way, is already unbelievably convincing. And we know this because when I was chair of the Sustainable Development Commission, we brought that evidence base together about what the consequences are of giving people access to that natural world. That evidence base serves to create a completely different approach to what the health service looks like. Now, last point, in that amazing world, and I know it sounds a bit amazing, but trust me, it's all available, the Field Studies Council flourishes, having acknowledged quite early on that it needed to come into the city and come more vibrantly into all things digital in order to meet people halfway. It repositions itself brilliantly with a series of strategic mergers, most importantly with the conservation volunteers. I'm pushing the boat out here a bit just for fun, which has emerged, the TCV has emerged from the dog days of the early 2010s as the only organization that really properly understands that connection between health and contact with the natural world. By then, all that ideological stuff about the environment has faded into the past, thank heavens. We've learned how to get beyond single issues. We've done the absolutely obvious things about the philosophy that underpins all of this, which is that all of this stuff about the environment essentially is about relationship and about meaning. Our relationship with the natural world and the meaning that we derive from that natural world as a way of informing and inspiring our own lives and the lives of people around us. So you won't be surprised to know that in 2020, Richard Louv has to rewrite his wonderful but slightly dystopian book, Last Child in the Woods, and it's then titled Every Child in the Woods.
I represent the games industry and the interactive entertainment industry. I've had a very varied career, but always been interested in participatory culture. And digital media has enabled an enormous potential for young people to participate, to share, to collaborate in new and very innovative ways. Much of my job is around campaigning for better policy, interventions for our industry, which is a huge potential economic growth driver for this country. We are the most creative country in the world, and we were the birthplace, if you like, of the games industry. But it's also to really try and campaign against the negativity that is always around screen-based culture in general, but specifically games. Games as an industry is faster growing globally than music and film. 1 in 3 people play games regularly. Almost 100% of young people, children, play games. They call them apps now, by the way. 55 million hours a day in the UK games are played, which is astounding. And yet the media tends to sort of point a negative finger at it and blame games for children not going out and exploring the environment around them. But I want to focus on the word play. Maggie mentioned the threat of banning play and how damaging this is to future generations. If you lock children away, you lock them away, it's not going to be constructive for their understanding of the world around them. But I want to argue that if you lock them away digitally as well, that is equally bad. Young people have no bias between this sort of false boundary we seem to have between physical and digital, that their playground is all around them and they're interacting in their playground in so many different ways that are unimaginable to us as young people in their age. Yet we seem to still maintain this prejudice and this bias and panic around overuse of screen-based culture. Games in themselves are incredible tools for learning about systems and our environment and the world in which we live in, and the curiosity and discovery and the understanding that children need to have, and the role that charities like FSC need to play in the next 70 years is about helping them to understand how systems work and their part within their system, and how the actions that they have and their agency changes the system. Games are always very, very good at playing through consequences, understanding the consequences of the actions and decisions you take, far better than playing broadcast media. They are also incredibly powerful ways to engage young people and older people as well into subjects, issues, challenges that they may not have even been remotely interested in. And this, I think, is the real opportunity that charities like the FSC have, is to embrace what young people are doing, to embrace how they are understanding the world around them and how they are playing, and to embrace and to try and help them to gain this new literacy around the systems which they are building. And if they can learn to code these systems, if they can learn to use data, to gather data, to use them in playful ways, then they will understand even more clearly where we're going wrong. There are lots of examples of games that do get kids out and get them active. Nintendo changed the living room experience with the Wii when they launched that originally. We have apps, very successful apps like Zombies Run, that use that word play really powerfully to get people out and running. But I'm going to leave you with a quote. I'm a big fan of Eric Zimmerman, who's a game designer in the States, and he's just written a manifesto for a ludic century. But he says, being playful is the engine of innovation and creativity. As we play, we think about thinking and we learn to act in new ways. The problems the world faces today requires the kinds of thinking that gaming literacy engenders. How does the price of gas in California affect the policies or the politics of the Middle East, affect the Amazon ecosystem? These problems force us to understand how the parts of a system fit together to create a complex whole with emergent effects. They require playful, innovative, transdisciplinary thinking in which systems can be analysed, redesigned, and transformed into something new. And there, I think, is the potential.
If you had to choose, Maggie, between 3 things as being the thing that makes being out in nature special for young people: physicality, moving around, getting fit, all that kind of stuff, understanding nature, or a more spiritual thing about kind of just being away from things? If you had to choose one of those, what's the most important?
For me, the closest it comes is that last one. But I don't think it's about a sense of awe and wonder. In almost every experience I've ever had with kids in those sorts of environments, which were nothing to do with my subject, I taught drama and English when I was a teacher, but it was standing on a hill in a proper dark sky and then realising that we live under the Milky Way. Or it was standing at the bottom of Cat Bells in an absolute piss-wet-through rainstorm and Ruth going, I'm not going up there. And us going, we'll see you tomorrow. And her having to make an emotional choice to step out of her comfort zone and away from her mascara and into her waterproofs and into the group experience. You know, when I go back to those school reunions and meet kids I used to teach, they go, oh, do you remember when we went up that mountain, miss? It's those things, and it needn't necessarily be, for me it's connected to a sense of awe and wonder, but that's because I'm the sort of person I am and I was brought up in the household I was brought up in. But for some children it won't be. It is about self and knowing that the next scary thing I meet, I can call up the thing that made me go up that mountain and I will be able to meet it.
So Jonathan, if you were the Field Studies Council, you were investing in an advertising campaign, would you be emphasising physicality, would you be emphasising understanding of nature, would it be this kind of transcendent thing?
Boringly, Matthew, it would depend on the audience. And it would depend on the age. I think it's something that changes. I too was a teacher of English and drama, and I too used to spend an awful lot of time with kids from Shepherd's Bush, taking them out to various educational experiences in the Welsh countryside. And yes, there was a residual sense of awe and wonder. I have to be honest, that was quite muted. The physicality of it was very present. These were tough 12 and 13-year-olds, and they weren't going to give us any kind of soliloquy on the wonders of the Welsh countryside. But was it a transformative experience? Yes, absolutely. But it was that harsh reality of being outside 8 hours a day, just getting to understand what that looked like. For some, that would lead on to an enthusiasm for understanding the natural world. But it would often start with that physical experience first.
And Joe, what about you? If we can tear ourselves away from the games, what do you think is something that you would advise the FSC to focus on in terms of how getting out into nature helps young people?
For me, the why. You know, why is that spark like that? The connections between creatures and fauna and flora, and the way it works as a system, and you know, my part within it. I have terrible, terrible memories. I grew up in Scotland and went to a boarding school where we were forced out to do Duke of Edinburgh Award in the Cairngorms, and it was not very nice. I still love staring at rocks and marvelling at their permanence and their history, and how they've got there. So that the why, the explanation, the connections between things is the things that I think, again, it's about this getting this systems literacy engendered in young people so that they understand why it's important to care, why things happen, why their actions or why actions of society potentially can be damaging.
Well, very neatly, the panel have all chosen one of my three options. So Maggie seems to have gone for the kind of spiritual awe, Jonathan's kind of roughly gone for the kind of physicality, and Joe's gone from understanding nature as a system. So I'm just for a laugh, let's just sit to the room, okay? So you're all advising the Field Studies Council how to promote nature to young people. All those who would emphasise the kind of physicality, the health and fitness of it all, put your hands up. Ooh, about an eighth of the room. Okay, and those who would emphasise understanding nature and its systems and how it works. Oh, that's probably about a third of the room. And those who would do this kind of spiritual awness, the awness of it all. Oh, you're all awful. I mean, you know what I mean.
But Matthew, listening to the other two, I think we're actually talking about strands of the same thing here.
Yes, of course
and
we are.
When you take children... When you take children into any of these places, what happens to them is all three of them, and they probably don't realise that any of them have happened to them until about 6 months after they came home.